The blue light from Sarah's phone cut through the dark bathroom like a razor. My bare feet froze on the cold tile reading the text. You smelled like victory tonight. I can't forget your taste. D. The words twisted my gut, leaving me exposed and gasping for air in the silent house. A perfect, smug confession. The rain hit the bathroom window like scattered gravel, each drop a tiny accusation. My bare feet, already cold from the tile, numbed further as I stared at Sarah's phone. The blue glow of the screen pulsed, stark against the darkness of the room. A text message, pulled from some forgotten corner of her notifications, had caught my eye. You smelled like victory tonight. I can't forget your taste, D. My insides felt like they were shrinking, turning brittle and cold, like liquid nitrogen poured into a delicate glass. It was all there suddenly. The new perfume, expensive and unfamiliar, that had started appearing on her dresser a few months back. The Italian silk pajamas she wore, the ones she said she'd bought for herself for comfort. I remembered her breathing in bed, too even, too deep, too perfectly practiced on nights when I lay awake, restless, something unsettling nudging at the edges of my thoughts. I'd been such a damn idiot. A financial analyst by trade, I could spot market crashes forming 2 quarters out, predict housing bubbles before they even fully inflated. But the deception unfolding under my own roof, in my own bed, had been invisible to me. I thought back to the subtle scent of Acqua di Arma cologne clinging to her scarf one evening, a smell not mine. The hidden credit card statements I dismissed as a budgeting error on my part, the casual gaslighting, the small shifts in her stories, her eyes that flickered just a fraction too long when I asked simple questions. Sarah had become a stranger, carefully constructed in plain sight. The real key, though, had been 3 days earlier. I was helping her clean out her designer tote, a favor after she'd complained about its weight. My fingers had brushed against something smooth and heavy, a black leather lanyard adorned with 18K gold accents. Emblazoned on it, in stark white lettering, were the words, Chandler Vex Holdings. The logo beneath it, an obsidian crow, seemed to mock me from the depths of her bag. I recognized the name instantly, or rather, the type of name. Mark Harrison, senior partner. These Wall Street types were all the same. Ruthless, connected. I'd Googled Mark Harrison that night, my fingers numb on the keyboard. Wharton MBA, Stanford Law. Member of every exclusive club the city offered. His pedigree stretched longer than the marriage certificate Sarah and I had signed 12 years ago. Then I remembered Sarah's Instagram post from a few weeks back. A silver McLaren 720S parked against a glittering city skyline. The caption, City Nights, with a string of flame emojis. I'd even commented, like a fool, beautiful. I thought she meant the skyline. With a precise, almost surgical care, I placed Sarah's phone back onto the charger stand, exactly where I'd found it. The blue light blinked once, then dimmed. I slipped back into our king-size bed, beside her still, silent form. The 600-thread count, Egyptian cotton, felt like sandpaper against my skin. Dawn brought a manufactured normalcy. The morning light filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Sarah stirred, stretched, then turned to me. She kissed me goodbye, her expensive lipstick tasting like betrayal. Don't forget Saturday, the Wall Street Gala, she said, her voice bright, unsuspecting. I adjusted my tie, its silk feeling suffocating around my neck. Wouldn't miss it, I said, the words alien in my own mouth. I knew then, I needed to see exactly how huge these clients were. Friday trudged past in a blur of numbers and risk assessments. My screen was a constant stream of market data, green and red flickering like a frantic pulse. I screened 16 calls from Sarah throughout the day. Each ring a fresh jab. I shot back 3-word texts. Market volatility. Tonight's busy. The truth was I needed the distance, the sterile hum of the trading floor, to feel anything resembling control. Mike Peterson from Vanguard called me around 4. Gala tomorrow night, Dave. You going? He asked, his voice booming through the desk speaker. I affirmed, my gaze fixed on a developing shorting pattern on the NASDAQ. It felt more honest than my marriage vows had felt in months. Heard Graywood just landed a Lamborghini for one of their top execs, Mike added, almost an afterthought. I considered it, picturing the sleek lines of the car. Mark Harrison, I thought, probably had a whole fleet for each day of the week. Saturday evening, I suited up in the custom charcoal suit Sarah had bought me. Back when December meant real joy, not just another month ticking down on a financial calendar. The fabric felt heavy, a shell against the hollowness inside. I arrived at the Four Seasons 2 hours early. The grand ballroom was still being transformed. Florists moved silently, arranging towering displays of white orchids. Waiters, uniformed and faceless, polished silverware with practiced efficiency. I took my post at the Grand Marble Bar, a solid anchor in the swirling preparations, and ordered a Macallan 25. The amber liquid, smooth and potent, was a familiar comfort. Then she entered. Sarah. A golden halter dress clung to her like liquid metal, reflecting the chandelier light. Her raven hair, usually loose and flowing, was swept up into a perfect chignon, secured with antique diamond pins that glinted. Heads swiveled. Conversations paused. She moved with an innate grace, a practiced elegance that drew every eye. She found me, of course. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each sound a precise countdown. You came, she said, a faint surprise in her voice, a question I chose not to answer. Her manicured hand, cool and slender, touched my forearm. I studied her hand, the perfect nails, the subtle pulse at her wrist, like I was analyzing a complex data set. Looks like you're the main attraction tonight, Sarah, I replied, my voice level. Tim, the bartender, a man who'd seen enough gala performances to read the room, slid another double Macallan across the polished bar toward me without a word. Society photographers began to circle, their flashes popping like distant firecrackers. Sarah knew every angle, every passage, every subtle turn of her head. We'd performed this dance for 8 years, a choreographed display of partnership. She worked the crowd with effortless precision, light touches on arms, calculated laughs at mediocre jokes about cryptocurrency, intense listening as she leaned in, her gaze unwavering. Every interaction was a calculated investment, a deposit into her personal brand. Then he materialized. Mark Harrison, 6'3", shoulders wide in a bespoke dark suit, a man radiating an almost offensive confidence. His Richard Mille watch, a complex piece of engineering, glinted on his wrist. A timepiece that cost more than an Ivy League education, probably more than my entire retirement fund. Sarah's micro-reactions betrayed her. A subtle flutter at the pulse point in her neck, almost imperceptible. Her pupils dilated, just enough to catch the light differently. A slight, almost involuntary shift of her weight, a magnetic pull drawing her infinitesimally closer to him. It was a language I was no longer blind to. Mark raised his glass, a Johnny Walker Blue, neat in our direction. A half-toast, half-challenge, his lips curved into a smirk that transmitted messages I was now fully decoding. Let's explore the auction preview, Dave, Sarah suggested, her voice pitched just a fraction higher than natural. Classic displacement behavior. I followed her, a silent shadow. Later, they called up for volunteers to present one of the charity auction items. Sarah, without consulting me, stepped forward. We'd love to present the Greek island escape package, she announced, her voice resonating through the ballroom. Her eyes, as she looked at Mark across the room, held his like auction paddles frozen midair, waiting for the final bid. We stood on stage, framed by the grand archway. Mark was there too, laughing, sharing some joke with the host. As the applause died down and we began to descend the steps, I saw his hand, Mark's hand, resting lightly on her lower back. That exact spot. The spot I used to trace with my thumb on Sunday mornings, when coffee steam mingled with her sleepy murmurs. He whispered something close enough to her ear to share breath, and Sarah's genuine laugh, light and unburdened, spilled out into the room. A laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I claimed space behind a heavy marble column, the Macallan warming my palm, feeling like a single ember in a vast, cold cavern. The room erupted in laughter again, celebrating everything except the truth, celebrating a performance that was shattering my world. I stood by the champagne fountain, a fresh glass in my hand, listening to the eddying currents of conversation, the clinking of crystal, the polite laughter, the murmurs of status and acquisition. Chandler Vex really closed that Marina Bay development, didn't they? A woman in a perfectly tailored Dior gown murmured to her companion. Mark Harrison led the whole deal single-handedly, they say. Brilliant. Then came the detail I needed, a whisper carrying more weight than gold. He leveraged that exclusive member access, for Krillux, her companion replied, leaning in conspiratorially. That's how he secures these massive deals, apparently. Guaranteed returns, they say. Krillux, the word resonated, in echo of the lanyard I'd found in Sarah's tote. Exclusive member access. It smelled like a pyramid scheme, designed not for the masses but for the ultra-rich, wrapped in layers of exclusivity and offshore secrecy. My mind, accustomed to sifting through complex financial data, began to connect the dots. Mark Harrison's illicit deals, the name Krillux, the member access that promised impossible returns. It was all there. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built my career on exposing financial risks, on dissecting fraudulent schemes, on protecting the unwitting investor. Now I found myself needing to dismantle one from within the crumbling walls of my own life, driven by a betrayal far more personal than any market crash. I imagined Mark Harrison's clients, not exactly unwitting perhaps, greedy certainly, drawn in by the intoxicating promise of exclusive access, the allure of obscene guaranteed returns. They were complicit in their own delusion. But Mark was the architect of that delusion. My initial raw heartbreak and anger began to cool, hardening into a cold, calculated determination. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was larger. It was about exposing a financial predator, a man who built his empire on the backs of others, fueled by hubris and the complicity of his victims. I started planning, mentally outlining the steps, how to gather irrefutable proof without raising suspicion, who to contact in my network, not just anyone, but the specific individuals who could act, who understood the intricate dance of financial crime, how to leak the information, making sure it landed with impact, but without implicating myself, without shattering the remnants of my own professional life. My home life became a finely tuned performance. I played the part of the oblivious husband, quiet, a little withdrawn, focused on my own work. But every move Sarah made, every hushed phone call she took in the other room, every subtle shift in her mood was noted, archived in my mind. She believed she was still hiding. I knew better. I realized the scale of what I was contemplating. Mark Harrison wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, connected. Taking him down would be like bringing down a small nation-state, a complex web of influence and protection. The weight of it pressed down on me, a constant, heavy presence. But the persistent image of Sarah's deceit, the echo of Mark's arrogant smirk, pushed me forward, relentlessly. There was no going back. I began subtly to archive our shared digital life. Photos of vacations, emails, old text messages, anything that could establish a timeline, a history, anything that might, in some unforeseen way, establish Sarah's deep, knowing involvement. It felt clinical, dissecting my own past. I reviewed my network of contacts, financial journalists I'd fed tips to in the past, Sekisi regulators I'd consulted with on complex cases, even an old friend in law enforcement who specialized in white-collar crime. I needed an unassailable strategy, a move that would be swift and devastating. The thought of the fallout, the public spectacle, the certain destruction of Sarah's life as I knew it, felt both sickeningly necessary and undeniably just. She had chosen her path, she had chosen him. But I also had to think of my own reputation, my career. I had built it painstakingly, brick by careful brick. I had to be surgical, precise. No collateral damage to myself was acceptable. This was a war, and I intended to win. Sleep offered no escape. My mind, a relentless machine, constantly replayed scenarios, building a fortress of information, preparing for the quiet, devastating battle ahead. My investigation into Krillux began with its official website. It was slick, minimalist, designed to convey an air of impenetrable sophistication. Vague phrases like unparalleled access and generational wealth opportunities were scattered across pages devoid of actual substance. No detailed financial reports, no clear operational structure, just high-resolution images of sleek skyscrapers and abstract art. It was precisely what I expected. I dug deeper, moving beyond the public facade. Obscure financial forums, the kind where anonymous users exchange whispers and half-truths, yielded fragmented clues. I tapped into my network, quietly pulling favors, listening to hushed conversations about unusual capital flows and offshore finance. I even ventured into the darker corners of the web, searching for any intelligence reports, no matter how speculative, that mentioned the name Krillux or Chandler Vex Holdings. The pattern emerged with chilling clarity. Mark Harrison was using Krillux as a conduit to funnel investments into a network of shell companies, promising extravagant returns based on assets that either didn't exist or were grossly inflated in value. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, centuries old in its bones, but masked with sophisticated Wall Street jargon, wrapped in the irresistible allure of exclusive member status, and presented with the kind of polished confidence only vast wealth could buy. I identified a key vulnerability. The member access that Mark so proudly touted was facilitated by a digital token. While it operated outside traditional blockchain protocols, rendering it untraceable through public ledgers, I deduced it had to be centrally controlled, likely by Mark Harrison's own servers or a discrete private network he managed. A single point of failure, a single point of entry. Through careful cross-referencing of publicly available data, charity donation lists, and corporate board affiliations, I began to recognize names. Prominent investors, influential politicians, even a few minor celebrities. They were all tied to Krillux, their reputations lending credibility to Mark's elaborate fraud. Then I found it, a disgruntled former employee of Chandler Vex Holdings. Their online footprint was small, mostly an old LinkedIn profile and a few anonymous posts on a niche finance blog. But the message was clear. Veiled warnings about ghost assets and paper fortunes tied to unseen ventures. A confirmation of my suspicions. Back at home, under the pretense of organizing old files, I returned to Sarah's hidden credit card statements. Now, instead of dismissing them, I cross-referenced the dates and locations with Mark Harrison's known travel itineraries, gleaned from business articles and social media mentions. The overlaps were glaring. Dubai, Monaco, Aspen. Luxury destinations, all listed as business travel on Sarah's statements, mirroring Mark's movements. She wasn't just vacationing. She was there with him, participating. Then, buried in a small velvet pouch in her jewelry box, I found it. A physical Krillux executive member card, sleek, metallic, with an embossed obsidian crow. It linked her directly to Mark's scheme, not just as a casual associate or a mistress on the side, but as a knowing participant, deep within the inner circle. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Potentially billions of dollars, siphoned off, laundered, disappeared into the digital ether. Mark Harrison wasn't just a cheat. He was a criminal mastermind, operating with audacious impunity. A grim satisfaction settled over me. This wasn't just petty revenge for a wounded ego. This was about bringing down a house of cards that deserved morally and legally to fall. This was about justice. I meticulously documented every piece of evidence, every IP address, every transaction, every connection. I created a watertight case, cross-referencing public records with private intel, building a narrative so compelling even the best legal teams couldn't deny it. I considered confronting Sarah with my findings, laying out the evidence, watching her carefully constructed world shatter. But I quickly decided against it. She would deny, she would gaslight, and then she would alert Mark. I needed the element of surprise. I needed to move in silence. The line between right and wrong, between exposing a criminal and destroying a life, blurred in my mind. I was using illicit information, gleaned from a violated trust, to expose illicit activities. But my motivations were deeply, personally rooted. It felt like an eye for an eye, a truth for a lie. I knew the impact would be devastating, not just for Mark, but for Sarah, for all the influential people associated with Krelux, their reputations, their fortunes, their very freedom. And I accepted the monumental cost. I reached out to an old college friend, now a senior investigator at the SEC. It was a carefully constructed conversation, framed as a hypothetical research project I was considering for my firm. I wanted to tap into his expertise, I said, on emerging financial instruments. I subtly hinted at a complex investment structure with unusual member access protocols that seemed too good to be true. He was a smart man, my friend. His professional curiosity I knew would be piqued. Next, I made anonymous contact with Amelia, a sharp-nosed financial journalist I'd met once at a media mixer. She had a reputation for breaking big Wall Street scandals, a tenacity that bordered on obsession. Through an untraceable email address, I provided her with carefully curated tips, breadcrumbs designed to lead her directly to Krelux. I didn't give her everything, just enough to ignite her investigative instincts, ensuring she would dig independently and voraciously, uncovering the truth on her own. I knew timing was everything. I waited patiently, watching the market like a hawk, anticipating a crucial market event, a ripple that would expose weaknesses in Mark Harrison's highly leveraged positions. It wasn't enough to just expose the fraud. I needed the conditions to be ripe for maximum impact, for the whole rotten structure to truly buckle. Once the stage was set, I meticulously leaked curated documents. A tranche here, a snippet there. Some went to my SEC contact, enough to warrant a preliminary inquiry. Others, different pieces of the puzzle, went to Amelia. I ensured they corroborated each other, building a consistent narrative, but never once revealing my hand or my identity. I used burner phones, encrypted channels, even public Wi-Fi networks in coffee shops far from my home. The financial analyst who once balanced books had transformed into a strategic spy, covering his tracks like a seasoned operative. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her oblivious charade. She was planning an upcoming trip with Mark, talking about new business ventures, a lavish getaway. She was completely unaware that I was systematically dismantling their world, piece by excruciating piece. I observed Mark Harrison's social media, his public appearances. Beneath the veneer of effortless charm, I started to notice subtle signs of stress. A forced smile in a photo, a veiled mention in an interview about unforeseen market challenges impacting investment strategies. The trap was tightening. My plan ensured that the information linking Sarah to Krelux as an executive member would inevitably surface. The card, the travel, the subtle cues. She wouldn't just be perceived as a victim or a naive partner. She would be complicit in the eyes of the public, her reputation shattered alongside his. My nights were spent hunched over my laptop, analyzing, refining, anticipating Mark Harrison's every move. It was a complex, high-stakes chess match, and I was always several steps ahead, mapping out contingencies, predicting countermoves. The satisfaction I felt was not joyful. It was hollow yet precise. I wasn't seeking happiness or redemption, but a cold, hard justice, a twisted, deeply personal brand of it. I practiced my poker face. At home, I was the same quiet, reliable Dave, going through the motions of our strained domesticity. Outside in the shadows, I was a silent, invisible wrecking ball, targeting the foundations of a fraudulent empire. I thought about the consequences for myself, the potential for professional ruin, for public scrutiny, for personal backlash. A small tremor of fear, a flicker of doubt ran through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by my unwavering, icy resolve. There was no turning back. The day came. The market experienced a sharp, unexpected downturn, the ripple I'd waited for. I made the final anonymous document drop, hitting send on the last encrypted email. I watched the clock. The fuse was lit and the countdown began. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The first whispers hit the niche financial news sites, almost unnoticed by the broader public. Cryptic articles about unregulated digital assets and exclusive member access schemes began to circulate, framed as speculative warnings. These were the first tremors, the groundwork laid by Amelia's initial probes. Then the official announcement dropped. The SEC, in a terse press release, confirmed it had launched a formal investigation into a prominent investment firm, Chandler Vex Holdings, citing irregularities in client portfolios and potential misrepresentations. It was cold, bureaucratic language, but its impact was a seismic wave through the financial world. Mark Harrison's carefully constructed empire began to show immediate, undeniable cracks. Stock prices for his associated companies, ones that had always seemed invincible, plummeted dramatically. News tickers scrolled across television screens, highlighting the sudden, precipitous drops. I observed Sarah's increasing anxiety. Her phone calls grew more frequent, taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. Her expressions, once perfectly composed, became strained, her brow furrowed. The once perfect facade, meticulously maintained, was visibly faltering. She'd always been so good at keeping up appearances. Then, Amelia's bombshell article dropped. It hit the front page of a national business newspaper, accompanied by a stark, black-and-white graphic of an obsidian crow. The headline screamed, "The Krillux Conspiracy, How Wall Street's Elite Were Duped." The article laid bare the intricate Ponzi scheme in brutal, damning detail, exposing the shell companies, the inflated assets, the promises of impossible returns. And there it was, buried deep in the narrative, a detail that resonated with chilling precision. The article mentioned a high-profile executive's wife, who was seen regularly at Krillux events, and crucially possessed an executive member card. It clearly implicated Sarah without needing to name her directly. Anyone who knew her or anyone who knew Mark Harrison would know. Panic set in among Mark Harrison's clients. The phones at Chandler Vex Holdings, I imagine, must have been ringing off the hook. Lawsuits were swiftly filed, their headlines splashed across legal journals. Media outlets swarmed the imposing building, their reporters baying for blood, their cameras flashing like predatory eyes. I watched Mark Harrison's public statements on the news. He delivered them with his characteristic arrogance, full of indignant denials and veiled legal threats against the press. But his eyes, even through the television screen, betrayed a profound, growing desperation, a flicker of true fear. The mask was slipping. Sarah, ever the performer, tried to play innocent. "Have you heard about this Krillux mess, Dave?" she asked one evening, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too casual as she stirred her tea. "Seems like a lot of powerful people are in trouble." I played along, offering vague, non-committal sympathies. "Yeah, I heard something about it," I said, keeping my eyes on the financial news channel. Always knew something like that would come out eventually. Too good to be true, those kinds of returns. I watched her squirm, the silence between us thick with the unspoken devastating truth. I saw her trying frantically to erase digital footprints. She spent hours on her phone, deleting old social media posts, scrubbing photos of her and Mark, purging emails. But it was too late. My evidence was already archived, immutable, a permanent record of their complicity. The financial world was in an uproar. Billions were lost overnight, reputations were shattered, legacies tarnished, and the media spotlight, relentless and unforgiving, was moving ever closer to Mark and inevitably to Sarah. I felt a strange, chilling detachment, watching the chaos I had unleashed. It was like watching a perfectly executed natural disaster unfold on a screen, knowing with a deep, quiet certainty that I was the earthquake. The luxury lifestyle they lived, built on Mark Harrison's elaborate fraud and Sarah's eager complicity, was visibly collapsing in real time. The designer clothes, the expensive trips, the glittering galas, all of it was vanishing, reduced to dust. I prepared for the final act, knowing the worst was yet to come for them both, and perhaps for a part of myself too. The cold satisfaction I felt was tinged with a deep, unsettling emptiness. The media frenzy intensified exponentially. It was no longer just financial news, it dominated every major network. Mark Harrison was formally indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and money laundering. His extensive assets, the sprawling Manhattan penthouse, the private jet, the offshore accounts, were immediately frozen. The swiftness was brutal. Sarah's name, now linked explicitly to the Krillux scandal through documents carefully placed by Amelia and the SEC, became unequivocally public. Her photo, once featured in society pages for galas, was now splashed across tabloids and online news sites, often alongside Mark's mugshot. The narrative was clear: the complicit mistress, the knowing partner. Her prestigious firm, a bastion of corporate law, wasted no time. A terse email forwarded to me by an acquaintance in HR announced her termination, citing irreconcilable differences and reputational damage that made her position untenable. Her high-flying career, built on ambition and carefully cultivated connections, was utterly over. Their Hamptons beach house, the Aspen Chalet, Mark's collection of McLarens and other luxury cars, all were seized by authorities, their value now just a footnote in a larger criminal investigation. The glittering, opulent facade they had built was completely gone, revealed as hollow, a flimsy stage set for a fraudulent play. I watched news reports detailing Sarah's spectacular fall from grace. The mocking tone of commentators, the public schadenfreude, was palpable and merciless. They picked apart her image, her lifestyle, her choices with a hunger that felt almost primal. I saw old friends and society acquaintances distance themselves from Sarah with an almost comical speed. Their invitations, once a constant stream, dried up. Calls went unanswered. The social pariah status settled on her quickly, like fine dust coating an abandoned mansion. Mark Harrison made bail, released on an astronomical bond, but his once commanding presence was gone. In the brief courthouse footage, he looked haunted, his bespoke suit hanging loose on his frame. His swagger was utterly gone, replaced by a hollow gaze, his eyes darting nervously. He was a broken man. I received a call from Mike Peterson, my friend from Vanguard. His voice was genuinely sympathetic, completely unaware of my pivotal role in the unfolding disaster. Crazy about Sarah, huh, Dave? Can you believe it? The news is saying she might be facing charges too. He paused. You doing all right, buddy? All this must be tough. I offered a non-committal response, a practiced neutrality. Yeah, Mike, it's something else, that's for sure. Our apartment, once a symbol of our perfect aspirational life, now felt like a mausoleum. The carefully chosen artwork, the expensive furniture, the silenced memories, all felt heavy, filled with the echoing ghost of our lives. The quiet was thick, oppressive. Sarah locked herself in our bedroom for days, emerging only for food or a quick, furtive trip to the kitchen. Her once immaculate appearance was replaced by visible dishevelment. Her hair was unkempt, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. She moved like a phantom, avoiding my gaze. I spent an afternoon in my home office preparing the divorce papers, clean and simple. No contest, a final necessary act of severing all remaining ties. I wanted nothing more from her. No assets, no alimony, just a clean break from the wreckage. The weight of my revenge felt heavy, not satisfying. I had won, yes, achieved in everything I set out to do, but at what profound cost to my own soul? The empty pit in my stomach hadn't filled. I considered the deep moral implications of my actions. I had methodically destroyed lives, perhaps justly, by exposing a truth that deserved to be revealed. But it was still an act of total, irrevocable destruction, leaving a trail of ruin that extended far beyond Mark Harrison. The silence in the apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the bullet-like rain from the night of my initial discovery. That night, the storm outside had mirrored the chaos within. Now, the quiet inside amplified the internal turmoil. I knew it was time for the final conversation, the one that would bring everything to a close and seal our separate fates, irrevocably. I found Sarah in the living room. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to me, staring out at the city lights. They glittered, an indifferent tapestry, once a symbol of our shared triumph, now seeming to mock her singular defeat. The rain had stopped. The air outside was clean, scrubbed. I walked toward her, the sound of my shoes muted on the thick carpet. She didn't turn. I held out the divorce papers, a thin stack of legal-sized white sheets. Her hand trembled slightly as she took them, her fingers brushing mine. Her eyes, though hollow from days of crying, remained cold, devoid of any genuine remorse when she finally looked at me. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice thin and flat, barely a whisper. Not how did you know, or how could you, but why did you do this? The question hung in the air, a stark, precise cut. You betrayed everything, I stated, my own voice equally flat, devoid of any residual emotion, just factual. The words were heavy, definitive. You chose him, his world, his lies. You made your bed. Sarah looked at me, a flicker of something. Not regret, but defiance hardening her jaw. Her chin lifted slightly. I loved him, Dave. He made me feel alive in a way you never could. The accusation hung there, raw and unsheathed. She continued, her voice gaining a brittle strength. She confessed she never truly loved me, not in the way a wife should. I was merely a means to an end, she said. A reliable, stable foundation for her boundless ambitions. A convenient step, a placeholder until the real game began. Her eyes were still cold as she spoke, unwavering. I don't regret Mark, she said, her chin lifting further. A final act of pride, or perhaps a desperate attempt to wound me one last time. Only getting caught. A cold, empty chasm opened within me, deeper than I'd ever known. My revenge was complete, devastatingly successful. I had dismantled their world, exposed their fraud, destroyed her career, her reputation, her carefully constructed life. But it hadn't brought peace. It hadn't brought satisfaction. Only a deeper, more profound solitude. The victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. She signed the papers without another word. The quiet, scratching sound of a pen filled the vast apartment, a mundane, undramatic end to 12 years. I watched her pack a small bag. Not the designer luggage she favored, but a simple overnight duffel. She left behind the expensive clothes, the designer bez, the remnants of a luxurious life I had methodically dismantled. They were just objects now, stripped of their power, hollowed out like everything else. As she walked out the door, she paused, her hand on the cold metal handle. She didn't turn back, just spoke to the empty hallway. You won, Dave, but you lost everything too. Then she was gone. The click of the lock echoed in the silence. I stood alone in the silent apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, the memories of a life that was never real. The victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. I had sought justice, or what I thought was justice, but found only emptiness. I thought of the moral consequences of my actions. I had become a predator to catch a predator. I had destroyed a life, even if that life was built on deceit. Where did that leave me in the grand scheme of things? Had I truly been better, or just more cunning? My career, my reputation were intact, meticulously preserved, a testament to my precision and foresight. But my heart felt like a vacant lot, cleared of everything, ready for nothing, an empty space where a home used to be. I looked out at the city, the rain finally stopped, the streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, shimmering. The new day promised nothing but an uncertain, solitary future. The silence in the apartment was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket after the storm of betrayal and calculated destruction. The city lights outside shimmered, blurring slightly through the unshed tears in my eyes. I had meticulously executed my plan, step by agonizing step, stripping away the lies, exposing the fraud, and dismantling the life Sarah had so carelessly built. I had won, but her final words echoed in the empty space, colder than any truth I had uncovered. You won, Dave, but you lost everything too. And in that moment I understood. The hollow victory, the absence of peace, the gnawing solitude that settled deep within my chest. I had sought justice, but found only an expanded emptiness. My heart, once fractured, now felt like a vacant lot, leveled and barren. I had meticulously preserved my career, my reputation, my financial security, but the cost was immeasurable. The new day, bleeding gray light into the room, promised nothing but an uncertain, solitary future.